If thrillers, murder mysteries, dark secrets, and shocking crime stories are your guilty pleasure, you've just entered the right place. Welcome to Salary and Sambars, romance, revenge, or crime katha. Today, I'm going to tell you about a chilling true crime case from Japan. A case that had turned cold, finally found justice after about 3 decades. This is the horrifying murder of Namiko, a 32-year-old loving mother and devoted wife, brutally killed in broad daylight inside her own home right in front of her 2-year-old toddler. But this is not just a murder story. This is a story of a husband's relentless fight to keep a promise of love, even after death. This is a story of love that turned into hatred, and hatred into murder. Welcome to one of Japan's most haunting true crime case, Nagoya Nishiku housewife murder case. Satoru Takaba, a divorced real estate agent, had become a man consumed by loneliness. After his failed marriage, Satoru's life revolved around just work, silence, and monotony. Little did he know, the loneliness would eventually pass, and a blessing was on the way. And just like that, Satoru's lonely world changed when a young and pretty client, Namiko, walked into his office. Namiko was beautiful, warm, and nearly 10 years younger than him. But that did not stop them from falling in love with each other almost instantly. For a man drowning in monotony, Namiko's company was joy. Her love healed him. Soon, the couple got married and welcomed a baby boy, Kohei. With dreams in their eyes and excitement in their hearts, the couple moved into a new rented home to begin a new chapter as parents. For the first time in years, Satoru finally had everything he had ever dreamed of: a loving wife, a beautiful little son, and a warm, cozy home. Life finally felt perfect. But least did he know, this happiness was going to pass too. On November 13th, 1999. A quiet Saturday afternoon in Nagoya, Japan. While the city was enjoying a peaceful Saturday weekend, Satoru Takaba left home for work in the morning. Their son Kohei was unwell that day. His loving wife, Namiko, prepared breakfast for him, and, before he left, Namiko told him that she would be taking Kohei to the doctor that morning. Satoru nodded, kissed Namiko goodbye, and left to work. Everything seemed ordinary. When Namiko got ready to take her son to the hospital, her car would not start. Namiko called her neighbor living on the 3rd floor and requested if she could borrow her car. But the request was denied. Still, determined to care for her child, Namiko pulled a wire or two, but managed to start her car and took her son to the pediatrician. She returned home around 11:40 a.m., unaware that within the next few moments, something horrifying that would shock Japan for decades was about to happen. The landlady of the apartment had a simple habit. Whenever fruits ripened in her garden, she would distribute them to the neighbors. That Saturday, she stopped outside Namiko's apartment to give her some fresh fruits too. She rang the bell once, no answer. But the landlady heard the television sound from inside. So she rang the bell again, but still no answer. Assuming Namiko was probably busy, the landlady decided to hang the bag of fruit on the doorknob and leave. But the moment the bag rested on the knob, the door slowly creaked open on its own. The landlady saw something strange and opened the door fully. And what she saw next terrified her for life. Right near the entrance and doorstep, there were blood stains on the floor, trailing from inside Namiko's house. At first, she froze. Then slowly, nervously, she stepped inside, following the trail of blood deeper into the apartment until she reached the living room. And there lay Namiko, motionless, collapsed in a pool of blood, her throat brutally cut. The television was on, ironically playing a comedy show titled "It's Okay to Laugh." What was all the more heart-wrenching was just a few feet away, Namiko's 2-year-old son sat beside his mother's body, too young to understand that she was already dead. The terrified landlady immediately called the police and then Satoru. Within minutes, one of Japan's most chilling murder mysteries had begun. Upon the landlady's call, Satoru rushed home immediately. As he approached the apartment building, he noticed police cars, paramedics, ambulance, and officers crowding outside his home. Pushing past the chaos, Satoru ran inside, and then he saw it. Paramedics desperately trying to bring his wife back to life, while Namiko lay motionless in a pool of blood. The scene was so horrific that for a moment, Satoru couldn't even process what he was looking at. This was the same woman who had smiled at him that morning, sending him off to work. And now, his entire world was lying lifeless. Despite the paramedics' efforts, Namiko's life could not be revived. At just 32 years old, Namiko Takaba was declared dead. And in that single moment, Satoru's world collapsed. Within minutes, the quiet apartment transformed into a horrifying crime scene. Police tape sealed off the house. Investigators flooded the rooms, and the hunt for a killer began. What they discovered inside was deeply disturbing. Namiko's body was found barely 3 meters from the entrance, lying motionless in the hallway. Her glasses had fallen beside her. One hand rested palm up on the floor, almost as if she had tried to reach out for help in her final moments. She was dressed casually, a sweatshirt and jeans, but across her neck was a deep, brutal wound made by a sharp weapon. There were no signs of sexual assault. Blood splatters and fingerprints covered the walls and floor of the living room, suggesting a violent struggle of the victim had taken place inside the apartment. Near the hallway stood a vacuum cleaner. Police believed Namiko had simply been doing her daily cleaning routine moments before she was attacked. As the investigators entered the bathroom opposite to the living room, they found even more blood splatter across the walls and floor. As investigators began reconstructing the crime scene, police deduced Namiko was first attacked inside the bathroom, but in panic, she ran toward the living room, possibly trying to protect her 2-year-old son. And that is where the killer finished the attack. The apartment showed clear signs of a violent struggle. Furniture had been overturned. Household items were scattered everywhere. But then came the strangest part. Nothing had been stolen. And then investigators noticed something even more confusing. Mixed among Namiko's blood splatter was another blood trail. It appeared near the bathroom sink, continued through the hallway, and all the way outside the entrance door. This trail did not seem like a splatter of blood that oozed out with force, but rather like it had dripped from a rapid loss of blood, which may only happen when ulnar type of veins in the body are cut. The investigators immediately deduced that this blood did not belong to Namiko. It belonged to the attacker. Police believed the intruder had been injured during the attack or the struggle. The investigation revealed blood in the bathroom sink, which meant the attacker had tried washing their injury, but the bleeding was too heavy to control. In panic, the intruder rushed out of the apartment after the murder, unknowingly leaving behind a bloody trail. Police soon brought in sniffer dogs to follow the killer's trail. The dogs tracked the scent away from the apartment until nearly 500 meters from the crime scene, leading investigators toward a nearby park. And then suddenly, the scent disappeared. The dogs stopped, as if the killer had vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, the autopsy report revealed horrifying details. Namiko had died from massive blood loss caused by multiple stab wounds to her neck. Cuts found on both her hands showed that she had desperately tried to defend herself during the attack. There was also swelling on the left side of her face, evidence that she had been struck violently before being killed. Forensic experts estimated she had died nearly 2 to 3 hours before her body was discovered. As Satoru tried to process the unimaginable horror inside his home, something else caught his attention. On the breakfast table, there were things he had never seen that morning. a half-eaten cup of instant noodles, and a nearly finished probiotic drink. According to Satoru, his wife never consumed these products. He informs the same to the investigators, which raised an unsettling possibility. Had the killer brought it into the apartment? As investigators examined the strange food items left on the table, they built a new possibility. What if the killer was a door-to-door salesperson? Maybe someone selling instant noodles or probiotic drinks had entered the apartment. An argument broke out, and the situation turned into murder. At first, the theory seemed possible, but Satoru immediately rejected it. Because according to him, Namiko was extremely cautious with strangers as they had a child at home. She would never casually open the door for salespeople. She was careful, alert, and protective of her home and child, which meant one terrifying thing. If someone had entered that apartment willingly, then it was probably someone Namiko knew, someone she trusted enough to open the door for. And just like that, the investigation took a dark new turn. Police were no longer looking for a random intruder. They were now searching for someone from Namiko's own circle. Police couldn't completely rule out Satoru himself as a suspect. The police questioned Satoru's neighbors about the couple's marriage. Did the couple have marital problems? Any hidden fights? Financial stress? An illegitimate affair? But everyone gave the same answer. Satoru and Namiko were known as kind, humble, and friendly people. They never caused trouble and seemed genuinely happy together. Then came the forensic breakthrough that changed the direction of the entire investigation. The blood samples collected from the apartment revealed two separate DNA profiles. One belonged to Namiko, and the other belonged to a woman with B-positive blood. In that instant, police made a shocking realization. The prime suspect was not a man. The killer they were hunting was a woman. Satoru was quickly ruled out from suspect list. As investigators searched the apartment for clues, they discovered multiple shoe prints near the hallway entrance. The prints appeared to belong to the suspect, wearing size 24 high heels. Police traced the design to a mass-produced shoe brand imported from South Korea. But there was one problem. Those shoes were incredibly common. Thousands, possibly millions of pairs had been sold. Tracking down one specific buyer was nearly impossible. Investigators refused to give up, so they began reconstructing Namiko's final hours. According to Satoru, he had left for work around 9 a.m. that morning. Before leaving, Namiko told him she had a doctor's appointment for their son at 11:10 a.m. Doctors later confirmed that she had indeed arrived at the clinic with her child. Then came another important statement. A neighbor said Namiko returned home around 11:40 a.m. Then investigators uncovered one final chilling detail from the landlady. At around close to 12 in noon, the landlady spoke to Namiko over the phone. It was just a casual conversation. Everything sounded normal. Until suddenly, Namiko said someone was at the door, and she hung up. Several neighbors later reported hearing loud noises coming from Namiko's apartment sometime between 12 p.m. and 1 p.m. Then, they heard hurried footsteps racing down the staircase. Someone had left that apartment in a panic. By around 3 p.m., the landlady arrived with fruits and discovered Namiko's body. As police continued piecing together Namiko's final hours, the timeline became even more clear. The killer most likely entered sometime around 12 noon and escaped before 3 p.m. But police still had one major question. What exactly happened in the hours before the murder? To answer that, investigators dug deeper into Namiko's personal life. They learned that Namiko was part of a local mothers group, and within that group, she was reportedly close friends with a woman who lived on the third floor of the same apartment building. Police immediately contacted the woman. She confirmed that Namiko had called her around 9 a.m. on the day of her murder, asking to borrow her husband's car because her own vehicle had broken down, but she had refused. Later, concerned about Namiko's situation, the woman tried calling her back multiple times, around 10:20 a.m., 10:40 a.m., and repeatedly between 12 noon and 2:30 p.m., but every single call went unanswered. The investigators' attention shifts toward the neighbor on the third floor and also the landlady who first discovered Namiko's body. After all, forensic evidence strongly suggested the intruder was a woman. Both women cooperated fully with investigators, but neither of them had injuries on their hands, and neither matched the blood group of the suspect found at the crime scene. So police moved on to another possibility: Satoru's ex-wife. Could jealousy or resentment have been the motive? But once again, the theory collapsed. She too cooperated with the investigation, and her blood type did not match the suspect's blood type. One by one, every suspect within Namiko's close circle was eliminated, and suddenly, the investigation became even more terrifying. Because if the killer wasn't family, wasn't a friend, and wasn't someone close to the couple, then who exactly had walked into Namiko's home that afternoon? But investigators couldn't fathom one detail. If the attacker had been bleeding heavily in her wrist, it could have no way stopped on its own, as she had mostly snapped her radial vein in the wrist. According to police, a person with that kind of serious injury could not have gone very far from the crime scene without medical help or drawing attention. If the killer escaped while leaving behind a trail of blood, then surely someone must have seen them. The investigators began questioning people around the exact location where the blood trail mysteriously ended. Now the investigators shift their search outside of Namiko's circle of people and questioned people around the area. A witness came forward claiming that around 12:15 p.m., just after the estimated time of the murder, they saw a woman in her 40s running anxiously through the area. What stood out was her behavior. She was clutching her wrist tightly against her chest, and it appeared to be bleeding. The witness described her as having freshly permed black hair. Then, nearly 400 meters away from the first witness, another witness reported seeing what seemed to be the same woman roughly 10 minutes later. The descriptions matched almost perfectly. Police began building the image of their suspect. A woman, around 160 centimeters tall, black permed hair, an injury on her hand or wrist, blood type B positive, wearing mass-produced South Korean high heels. Investigators even created a sketch based on the witness descriptions, but they never released it publicly, fearing that revealing too much could alert the killer. Instead, officers quietly went door to door, asking residents if they recognized the woman from the sketch. But every answer led to the same dead end. No one knew her. No one remembered seeing her before. Then investigators noticed something deeply unsettling about the crime itself. The killer didn't seem prepared. According to witnesses, she wore no mask, no gloves, no attempt to hide her face. And the fact that she injured herself during the struggle suggested one important thing. This wasn't the work of a professional assassin. Police began believing the attack was driven by intense emotion, rage, or possibly revenge. But one question continued haunting the investigation. The murder happened on a Saturday, a day when most husbands would normally be home. Yet somehow, the killer appeared to know that Satoru had gone to work that day. Was that just coincidence? After those witness sightings, the trail suddenly went cold. No more sightings, no more clues, no trace of the mysterious woman ever again. It was as if the killer had completely vanished. Then, 2 years later, in 2001, Namiko's son, Kohei, who was only 4 years old by then, suddenly told his father something strange. He claimed to remember the person who killed his mother. It was a woman from a nearby supermarket. For Satoru, who was already vulnerable in grief, every clue mattered. Upon Satoru's urging, police immediately reopened the investigation and began checking supermarkets around the area. Employees were questioned. Women matching the description were looked into. But there was one major problem. The memory of a traumatized 4-year-old child was difficult to verify. And with so many supermarkets and employees, the investigation once again collapsed into another dead end. Years passed. Over 100 investigators and police officials had worked on finding the killer. Over time, countless theories rumored. The investigators chased lead after lead, but nothing worked. Slowly, the case became cold. But one man refused to let Namiko be forgotten: Satoru Takaba. Even after moving in with his parents after the murder of his wife, he did something profound. He continued renting the apartment where Namiko was murdered, month after month, year after year. For 26 years, Satoru paid nearly 20 million yen, over 1.2 crore Indian rupees, just to preserve the crime scene exactly as it was on the day his wife died. Because deep inside, he believed one thing, that someday the truth would come. Satoru preserved everything: the bloodstains, the fingerprints, his son's toys, Namiko's favorite books, the household items that had been knocked over during the murder. Even the calendar still remained open to November 1999. Nothing was touched. Walking into that home felt like stepping into a haunted time capsule of tragedy. And yet, Satoru kept returning there every single day. He would sit quietly inside the crime scene, read books, listen to music, surrounded by memories of the life that had been ripped away from him without a warning. And no matter how many years passed, he refused to give up, because in his mind, finding the killer was the least he could do for the woman he loved, even after her death. Every year, Satoru and his son Kohei stood on the streets of Nagoya, distributing flyers to strangers, hoping that somewhere, someone had seen something they never reported. But as the years passed, another terrifying fear began closing in: time itself. At that time, Japan still had a statute of limitations for murder cases, which meant that if the killer wasn't found within 15 years, the case would legally expire. And that meant if the case was not solved within a period of time, the person who murdered Namiko could walk free forever. Satoru refused to let Namiko's case disappear into silence. Driven by grief and desperation, he joined a victims' advocacy group. This group helped Satoru lead a movement to abolish Japan's statute of limitations for murder cases. For years, Satoru participated in campaigns pushing for legal reform with the statute limitation of murder. And finally, in 2010, after years of pressure from grieving families and activists, Japan abolished the statute of limitations for murder. Through the tragedy of his wife's case, Satoru had helped change Japanese society forever. Delayed justice was now finally possible. But even after changing the law, Satoru still did not have justice for Namiko. But after 26 years, in 2025, with the advancement of forensic technologies, new advancements in DNA testing gave police one final chance to identify the killer. Investigators began collecting DNA samples from female residents on their consent. Most cooperated willingly, but one woman refused. A 69-year-old Kumiko Yasufuku, a normal old lady. Police found her refusal suspicious, but the law prevented taking anyone's DNA without consent. So investigators continued pressuring her for months, until finally, Kumiko gave in. On October 31st, 2025, Kumiko turned herself in and confessed the murder of Namiko to the investigators after going through 26 years of guilt and fear of being exposed. And when the test results came back, the DNA matched the blood found at Namiko's crime scene. The mystery of Namiko's case was finally broken after 26 years. But the biggest twist was yet to come. Kumiko had no connection to Namiko, but she did have a connection to Satoru. Kumiko and Satoru had studied together in high school and had attended the same tennis club. When police revealed her identity, Satoru was stunned. It had been so many years since he had last seen Kumiko that he had almost forgotten she even existed. Then investigators uncovered a disturbing truth. Back in school, Kumiko was in love with Satoru and had confessed her feelings to him. But he did not feel the same way and denied her. Her love was unrequited. Though Kumiko got married later to someone else, yet her feelings for Satoru lingered in her heart decades later. The two met again at a school reunion. During their conversation, Satoru casually mentioned that he was happily married to Namiko. For Satoru, it was just a brief conversation. But for Kumiko, it ignited jealousy. Somewhere over the years, love may have twisted into obsession, and obsession into hatred. Hatred aimed not at Satoru, but at Namiko. Yet even after confessing to the murder, Kumiko never revealed her true motive. She invoked her right to remain silent. To this day, the complete reason behind Namiko's murder remains locked inside her mind. Kumiko Yasufuku is currently under arrest and her trial is ongoing. Japanese prosecutors concluded that she is mentally fit to stand trial and be held criminally responsible. While the law may have caught Kumiko only decades later, perhaps her real punishment had already begun in her own mind long ago, living every single day in fear, waiting for the handcuffs. After nearly 3 decades, Japan may finally witness the end of one of its most haunting murder mysteries. The 26-year persistence of a husband who simply refused to let his wife be forgotten finally bore its fruit. Satoru unknowingly preserved the very evidence that would one day help find Namiko's killer. By freezing the tragical crime scene in time, years later, as forensic technology evolved, the preservation helped investigators return to the untouched crime scene, re-examine blood traces, study DNA evidence, and reconstruct the killer's movements with fresh knowledge and modern science. Satoru taught the world something unforgettable. Real love does not disappear with death. It survives through loyalty, through patience, through persistence, even long after they are gone. But beyond the arrest of Kumiko, beyond the praise for Satoru's persistence for justice, one painful question still remains. What about Kohei, the little boy who unknowingly sat beside his mother's lifeless body? The little boy who did not deserve to be robbed of his mother's love. Will that heart ever truly heal from the trauma? Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Stay tuned to Salary and Sambar for haunting crime stories and more.